Imagine being completely trapped on this tiny, isolated speck of land.
Just entirely surrounded.
Exactly. You're surrounded by enemy forces on all sides. There's absolutely no escape, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide.
And bombs are falling from the sky with this terrifying, almost mechanical regularity.
Right. Your daily reality is just this exhausting, relentless mix of starvation, sheer stubborn defiance, and a really desperate hope for survival.
Which sounds bad enough on its own.
But here's the twist. While thousands of tons of high explosives are completely reshaping your world from above, a brutal serial killer is on the loose below.
Operating right in your own backyard.
Using that deafening chaos, the fog of war, as this perfect, impenetrable cover. Welcome to another deep dive.
So glad you're joining us today.
I'm incredibly thrilled you're here, because we are looking at a stack of really fascinating source materials today. We're centering our discussion around excerpts from a historical novel called The Information Officer by Mark Mills.
Along with some incredibly detailed historical maps of the Mediterranean, the island of Malta, and its capital, Valletta.
Yeah, and our mission for this deep dive is to unpack the fascinating intersection of historical survival, the deeply cynical but necessary mechanics of wartime propaganda.
Or as the characters prefer to call it, gilding the pill.
Right, gilding the pill. We're looking at that. And an intimate, chilling murder mystery hidden within the massive macro-level destruction of World War II.
It is a phenomenal set of sources to explore, and the reason you, the listener, should really care about this specific deep dive is because it resonates so profoundly with the modern world we're navigating right now.
Oh, absolutely. The parallels are wild.
We live in an era of constant information overload. We're surrounded by debates over what constitutes fake news, and we live our lives through these highly curated social media realities.
Yeah.
So looking at how a besieged island in 1942 managed the flow of absolutely devastating facts just to keep a population's hope alive, it offers an incredible mirror to our own consumption of media.
We really have to ask ourselves, who is shaping the narrative we consume? What facts are being omitted for our own supposed good?
Exactly. Plus, the juxtaposition of the macro-level war, where thousands of bombs are falling and destroying entire cities.
Against the micro-level murder of one single individual.
It's a profound psychological study. Why does one specific death matter when thousands of people are dying all around them? It cuts right to the core of how we value human life.
Okay, let's unpack this. The author, Mark Mills, makes a really interesting structural choice right at the beginning of the text.
He doesn't start in the rubble.
No, he doesn't start us in the rubble of Malta in 1942. He starts the frame narrative 9 years later in a completely different world.
May 1951.
Right. We are placed inside a posh, highly successful London restaurant. The austerity of the post-war years is finally starting to fade, and the restaurant is preparing for a busy night.
Heaving dining rooms.
Yeah, and we're introduced to this entire scene through the eyes of a character named Mario, the restaurant manager. Tell me a bit about Mario, because he seems to function as a very specific kind of lens for the reader.
Yeah, Mario serves as the quintessential observer. The text establishes him as an Italian immigrant, the son of a hardworking shoemaker, and a man who prides himself immensely on his absolute discretion.
He knows everyone.
He knows the household names who come to eat, he knows exactly where they prefer to sit, and he's a master at juggling the massive egos of the London elite.
He's basically trained to watch people without ever being seen watching them.
Precisely. The text also notes that he's in a particularly good mood, a legacy from his father, who taught him to give daily thanks for the simple things most people take for granted.
Which establishes a nice baseline of normalcy.
A baseline of appreciation for everyday life, yeah. And that baseline is about to be violently contrasted with the intense trauma we are going to uncover.
Because his expert attention is suddenly drawn to a specific table in the dining room, referred to simply as Table 7. Let's look at what is happening at Table 7.
It's a great scene.
The husband sitting there has ordered a very special white French wine to surprise his wife. It's clearly a romantic gesture. He's gone through the trouble of arranging for it to be brought in by taxi. He's paid the corkage fee.
The bottle is currently chilling on ice behind the bar.
But when the waiter brings the bottle over to the table and presents it, the husband doesn't smile. He doesn't look happy about his wife's imminent arrival.
Not at all.
The text describes him falling absolutely still, the blood completely draining from his face.
Yeah.
Because it is not his wife who arranged this intercept.
It's a balding American man.
And with what the text describes as a lazy grace, he swivels around from the bar.
And the tension in the room skyrockets the moment this American makes his presence known. Mario, despite his immense pride in his professional discretion, decides that he absolutely has to eavesdrop on this interaction.
He physically hides himself behind a high banquette just to listen.
The dialogue that follows is completely chilling. The American casually walks over and tells the husband that he looks like he's seen a ghost.
The husband immediately and defensively demands to know where his wife is.
And the American calmly replies that she's at home and that she thought the two of them should have a talk. The husband clearly doesn't believe a word of this.
No, and the American casually offers him a Russian cigarette. Then the husband asks a question that sets the entire tone for the mystery. He asks, "What's your secret? You've barely aged in 10 years.
And the American replies with a single word: 9.
He's correcting the math.
Yeah, correcting the math. The husband says that it feels longer, and the American drops the real conversational bomb. He says, "I miss Malta."
The husband retorts, "I doubt that. You don't seem very pleased to see me." And then we hit the climax of this brief, tense exchange. The American asks the husband what he expected.
And the husband replies, "The last time I saw you, you tried to kill me."
Wow. We really have to look at the absolute power of perspective here and the concept of the unreliable past.
What's fascinating here is that this is clearly not a warm reunion of old war buddies sharing a drink. This is a direct confrontation between a predator and prey.
But it's entirely unclear to the observer who is who in this dynamic. The husband firmly believes he was the victim of a brutal attempted murder.
But look at the American's response. He asks, "Is that what they told you?"
The husband says that they didn't have to tell him anything because he was there and he remembers it.
The American then delivers this incredibly cold, precise line. He says, "You're wrong. I could have killed you. Maybe I should have. I chose not to."
I chose not to. That is such an intense assertion of dominance. It tells us that whatever happened back on that island amidst the chaos of 1942 left incredibly deep, totally unresolved scars.
It's a brilliantly executed narrative hook. We know going into the main story that at least these two men survived the Siege of Malta.
But the truth of their conflict, the reality of what actually transpired between them, is deeply contested.
One man remembers a malicious attempted murder.
And the other man remembers an act of supreme, perhaps arrogant mercy.
This prologue totally primes us to question every single narrative we're about to encounter in the text.
Right, because if these two men cannot even agree on the basic facts of a life or death moment they both directly participated in, how can anyone trust the official, documented history of the war?
It sets up the thematic core of the entire text, the manipulation of truth and the fragility of memory. We are implicitly told to look for the gaps in the story.
The dark spaces between what is officially said and what actually happened on the ground.
And that realization directly transitions us into the geographical and historical reality of Malta in May 1942.
Looking at the mental maps provided in our sources, we need to paint a clear picture of this geographical context for you. If you look at a map of the Mediterranean during this specific period of World War II, the picture for the Allies is incredibly bleak.
Extremely.
The sea is almost entirely dominated by Axis territory. You have fascist Italy commanding the north and Nazi-controlled North Africa dominating the south.
Right in the middle of this hostile sea, there is one tiny, singular Allied speck, Malta.
It's an isolated fortress, just 17 miles long and 9 miles wide at its absolute widest point. Yet it is home to over 250,000 people.
Yeah.
Tell me about the strategic importance of this tiny rock, because it seems entirely out of proportion to its physical size.
Well, Malta was arguably one of the most strategically vital pieces of land in the entire war.
Yeah.
It sits squarely across the main Axis supply lines running from Italy down to General Rommel's forces in North Africa.
Right.
British submarines and aircraft based on Malta were wreaking absolute havoc on those supply convoys. If Rommel didn't get his fuel and his tanks, the Axis would lose North Africa.
And potentially lose access to the oil fields of the Middle East.
Exactly. Field Marshal Kesselring, the German commander stationed in Sicily, understood this perfectly. He was absolutely determined to wipe Malta off the map.
His strategy was just to bomb the island into complete oblivion.
To clear the way for a massive airborne and seaborne invasion, we have to grasp the intense claustrophobia of this geography. There is nowhere for the population to run.
The surrounding waters are crawling with enemy ships, and the skies are blackened by the Luftwaffe and the Italian Regia Aeronautica.
The physical isolation creates a psychological pressure cooker. Every single person on that island knows they're trapped.
And they know the enemy's stated goal is to starve them out and bomb them into submission. So the author takes us straight from that macro-level geographical nightmare into a deeply intimate micro-level horror.
We transition from the grand map to a dark, twisting pathway inside a Maltese cemetery.
It's May 1942, a moonless night. We're introduced to a young Maltese woman named Carmela. What exactly is she walking into here?
She's walking home from her job at a local establishment called the Blue Parrot, and she is navigating a cemetery path in total, absolute darkness.
Before the war, this path would have been beautifully lit by flickering memorial candles.
But now, because of the strict blackout restrictions enforced to prevent night bombing, it is pitch black. The author uses incredible sensory details to establish the atmosphere.
There's a mellow, warm scent of pine sap drifting on the night breeze.
But that pleasant, natural smell is actively battling a rank, overwhelming, deeply unnatural odor of putrefaction.
Putrefaction.
Yeah.
In a cemetery, sure, but smelling it openly in the air as you walk by, that's intense.
Yes, because the bombs don't just kill the living above ground, they disturb the dead below it. The text details that 2 wayward bombs had smashed directly into the hillside the previous night. The locals actually call these specific bombs Chichi macaroni.
Wait, chichi macaroni, what does that translate? It sounds like a punchline, but we're talking about deadly explosives ripping up a graveyard.
It translates roughly to chubby macaroni.
Chubby macaroni, wow.
It's a dark, mocking reference to the shape of the Italian bombs. This is a vital example of gallows humor. When you are powerless against high explosives dropping from the sky, stripping them of their terror by giving them a ridiculous domestic nickname is a profound psychological defense mechanism.
That makes total sense. So those chubby macaroni bombs reduced ancient family tombs to rubble and physically wrenched coffins right out of the thin topsoil.
Corpses in various stages of decomposition have been violently scattered everywhere. The local priest, Father De Bono, had actually referred to the scene at morning mass as a dress rehearsal for Judgment Day.
That line from the priest triggers a fascinating look at how the community is fracturing under the stress. Father De Bono is flirting with some serious irreverence there, making a dark joke about a horrifically traumatizing situation.
He is. And the text shows this, creating a split in his congregation.
Right. The older, deeply conservative generation, represented by a character named Old Gretch and his sister, furrow their brows. They literally tut-tut from their pews, offended by the priest's dark humor.
But Carmela, representing the younger generation, completely respects him.
Why the divide?
Carmela respects him because she knows the reality of the situation. She knows it was Father De Bono, not the tut-tutting elders who actually spent the entire day out in the pitiless heat, dealing with the inhuman stench, toiling physically to ensure all those scattered corpses were recovered and reburied with proper respectful rites.
This small, incredibly grained detail illustrates how extreme stress begins to break down pre-war social norms. The old pieties and conservative judgments simply do not hold up when you are the one picking up decomposing limbs in the hot sun.
Dark humor and practical, grim action become the new markers of morality. The old guard wants to maintain polite decorum.
While the realists just want to get the bodies back in the ground before the rats get to them.
Exactly. So as Carmela is walking through this nightmare scenario, she sees a flickering flame up ahead. A man is lighting a cigarette in the dark.
She slows down out of respect, assuming it's a grieving relative.
That in itself shows how normalized this trauma has become. Finding people weeping in graveyards in the middle of the night is just accepted as part of daily life.
She says good evening in Maltese, and the man responds in English. He says, I think you'll find it's morning, Carmela.
Notice the immediate shift in power dynamics. He knows her name. He knows what she does for a living. He asks, did you make good money tonight?
At first, she tries to rationalize the encounter. She thinks it might be one of the regular military officers from the Blue Parrot.
Someone she knows, like Harry or Bernard or Little Willie.
But it's not. The man's voice is a slow, easy drawl, and he deliberately remains silent after his question, actively enjoying her growing confusion and her escalating discomfort.
When she tries to hurry past him to safety, he violently seizes her arm.
The violence escalates with terrifying speed. He twists her arm up behind her back until something actually gives way in her shoulder. The sheer pain brings her to the brink of passing out.
He clamps his hand over her mouth.
And as she struggles, desperately thinking of her safe home, her parents, her dog waiting just up the hill, he whispers into her ear, you want to know who I am? I'm the last living soul you'll ever set eyes on.
It is a profoundly terrifying scene. And the author makes it all the more horrifying by emphasizing a very specific, chilling detail.
The killer's breathing.
Yes. Despite the violent physical struggle, his breathing remains strangely calm, deep, and measured. The text notes that there was something in the sound of his breath that suggested he was actually smiling in the dark.
This is not a crime of sudden panic or temporary passion. This is cold, calculated, and clearly highly practiced.
We get a glimpse into this killer's mind a bit later in the source text. It is a fragmented section, but incredibly revealing about his psychology.
The killer is sitting in the faint light of a small pepper tin lamp, and he is actively admiring his own hands,
He's flexing his elbow, his wrist, his fingers.
deeply enjoying the physical play of his own muscle and sinew. He reflects on the idea that men don't generally notice hands, but women do. And specifically, his mother did.
He remembers from endless compliments, how she used the word best constantly, scattering praise like a farmer spreading seed.
This raises an important question. We have to ask ourselves how a man with this specific pathology operates in a war zone. We are looking at someone who is deeply narcissistic, obsessed with his own physical perfection, and fixated on his mother's overabundant praise.
How does a mind that craves that level of validation and control function in the middle of a chaotic, uncontrollable siege?
It seems like a massive contradiction. If you crave total control, a war zone where you could be vaporized at any second by an unseen bomber seems like the worst possible environment.
It is the worst possible environment for that ego. War is the ultimate, absolute loss of individual control. Bombs fall arbitrarily without caring how perfect your hands are.
The military hierarchy dictates your every waking move. You are nothing more than a disposable cog in a massive machine facing annihilation.
For a psychopath who requires control to maintain his self-image, this environment is deeply threatening. So how does he adapt?
He finds total, absolute control in intimate, localized violence.
Exactly. While the world above is spinning completely out of control, while Kesselring and the Luftwaffe dictate the fate of the island, this man reclaims his godlike power by dominating and ending a single life in the dark.
He cannot control the grand sweep of the war, but he can absolutely dictate every detail of Carmela's final moments on Earth. It's a chilling psychological adaptation to extreme, chaotic circumstances.
And that desperate need for control, the killer finding it in the dark cemetery, it perfectly mirrors what the British command was trying to do in the daylight.
They couldn't control the Luftwaffe, so they had to control the narrative.
Which brings us to day one and our introduction to Max, the protagonist of the story. Max holds the title of Information Officer.
He is currently at the Union Club having a meeting with a young, newly hijacked recruit named Edward Pemberton. What is the significance of this setting?
The contrast the author builds here is incredibly deliberate. The Union Club is housed inside the old Auberge de Provence. It's this grand, sweeping Baroque edifice, once the home of the Knights of St. John.
It features elaborately painted walls and high-beamed ceilings.
It bears a charmed life, standing remarkably unscathed among the utter ruins and rubble of Valletta's principal street. It exists to offer the officers a reassuring, familiar whiff of a high-end St. James's Gentlemen's Club back in London.
It is architecture specifically designed to project permanence, civilization, and unshakable order.
But the brutal reality of the war immediately intrudes on this illusion of civilization. Max is trying to offer Pemberton tea or coffee, making a bleak joke that the tea tastes like dishwater and the coffee like slurry runoff.
And he flags down a waiter. But it isn't the usual familiar waiter, Ugo. It is a new, squat, toad-like member of the kitchen staff.
Max asks this new waiter, "How's Ugo's wife?"
And the waiter bluntly replies, "She dead."
And the waiter doesn't just deliver the news bluntly, he physically mimics her violent death. He tilts his head sharply to one side, lets a fat tongue roll out of his mouth, and keeps his eyes wide open, staring blankly.
Max's internal reaction to this grotesque, deeply offensive pantomime is incredibly telling. He doesn't show outrage at the waiter's blatant insensitivity. He doesn't reprimand him.
Instead, his thoughts drift to Ugo, and he simply wonders how long it will be before Ugo is able to smile his crooked smile again.
That reaction perfectly encapsulates the brutality of normalcy in a war zone. When death is literally everywhere, it loses its sanctity.
Grief is sidelined by the mere exhausting act of basic existence.
You cannot stop the war to mourn one waiter's wife when dozens or hundreds might have died that same afternoon. People are forced to normalize the absolutely horrific just to keep functioning and breathing.
That normalization leads directly into the core of Max's job, which is essentially to manage and curate this collective trauma for the public.
Max is evaluating young Pemberton, who was originally supposed to fly out to Gibraltar but got stranded on Malta because his connecting seaplane was likely shot down.
Max is trying to gauge what Pemberton actually knows about the situation on the island.
Pemberton gives the classic patriotic answer that everyone back in England knew to be true. He says, I know about faith, hope, and charity.
If you know anything about the popular history of Malta in World War II, you know this story. It is the legendary tale of the three obsolescent Gloucester Gladiator biplanes that supposedly single-handedly held off the entire Italian Regia Aeronautica in the desperate summer of 1940.
It is the ultimate David and Goliath myth. The newspapers back home in Britain absolutely enshrine them in the popular imagination. But Max immediately shatters this beautiful illusion for Pemberton. Max bluntly states, actually, there were 6 of them.
6 gladiators, plus a bunch more held back in crates for spares.
Pemberton is totally confused by this. He says he doesn't understand.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Max lays bare the foundational, deeply cynical truth of his profession. He says, 3 makes for a better story, and there were never more than 3 in the air at any one time, the others being unserviceable.
Max explains that the biblical names, faith, hope, and charity, were coined and quietly disseminated to the press by his predecessor at the Information Office.
Why choose those names specifically? Why not name them after British kings or Greek gods?
Because it was a highly calculated narrative strategy designed to appeal directly to the deeply fervent Catholicism of the local Maltese population. It wasn't an accident of history. It was a PR move.
The number 3 has immense power in Western and specifically Catholic storytelling, echoing the Holy Trinity. It turns a desperate mechanical failure, the fact that they could only keep 3 planes running at a time, into a divine myth.
Pemberton, who holds a degree in history from Oxford, immediately clocks what is happening. He says, you mean propaganda? And Max gives a very revealing defensive response. He says, that's not a word we like to use.
He insists the Information Office is ostensibly independent. Pemberton pushes back with a flicker of youthful academic righteousness, but Max shuts it down immediately. He says, look, none of us is in the business of dragging people's spirits down. The Huns and Itais have cornered that market.
That is the absolute crux of the matter. We see this all the time in modern PR strategies. Simplify the numbers, attach a moral value to the story, and repeat it until it becomes the accepted reality.
Max is giving Pemberton a harsh lesson in political history. He explains that back in 1940, Malta was a very divided island politically. You had the Constitutionalists, the Strickland Loyalists who were pro-British and completely controlled the local press, specifically the Times of Malta and Ilberca.
On the other side, you had many Maltese nationalists who actively wanted independence from the British Empire. They felt a deep cultural and linguistic affinity with Italy.
At least until Mussolini actually started dropping high explosives on their homes.
We have to understand this political tension to understand Max's role. The Maltese people, as Max points out, are not fools. They can spot a lie at 100 paces. They are deeply wary of the Strickland Papers, which they know are heavily slanted toward the British establishment and colonial interests.
Therefore, the Information Office is a strict necessity. Max's job is to produce the daily situation report and the weekly bulletin.
He has to thread an incredibly delicate needle every single day. He must provide news that is factual, cold, and apparently unbiased, so the suspicious population actually believes it.
The daily situation report acts as a literal, grim scorecard for the island. How many bombs found their marks today? How many planes did the enemy lose? How many planes did we lose?
But even the basic facts of the day are hotly contested. Max spends his exhausted evenings mediating furious, petty disputes between the Royal Air Force and the Royal Artillery over who shot down what.
In the wild, deafening confusion of a massive air raid, who can accurately say if a German Stuka was brought down by anti-aircraft fire from the ground or the hurricane fighter chasing it from the sky?
Max complains bitterly that he gets summoned from dinner parties just to listen to the tedious bleatings of HQ Royal Artillery and RAF intelligence, both desperate to claim another precious scalp for their own unit's internal morale.
Beyond the reports, he monitors enemy radio broadcasts, he translates BBC broadcasts into Maltese, and he produces light entertainment for the rediffusion system.
I want to pause on that word. What is the rediffusion system? Most modern listeners probably haven't encountered that term.
It is a vital piece of the communications puzzle. Rediffusion was a wired broadcasting system. Instead of broadcasting radio waves through the air, which could easily be jammed by the Axis powers just miles away in Sicily, rediffusion sent the audio signal directly through physical wires into loudspeakers in people's homes or in public squares.
It was basically an early form of cable audio.
Exactly. It was completely immune to enemy jamming, which made it the perfect tool for a captive audience. It was an exhausting juggling act for Max, managing facts, spin, and morale across all these different mediums.
Pemberton finally grasps the grim reality of the job and summarizes it beautifully with the phrase, gilding the pill.
It is not outright lying, because outright lying would instantly destroy their credibility with a skeptical public.
It is taking the overwhelmingly bitter truth of their imminent destruction and coding it in just enough gold, just enough hope, just enough broader context that the population can swallow it and find the will to keep fighting for one more day.
To give Pemberton a taste of the social survival mechanics required on the island, Max invites him to a drinks party later that afternoon in Slima at the home of a couple named Rosamund and Hugh.
This introduces us to another profound psychological coping mechanism, the architecture of distraction. Max picks Pemberton up on a motorcycle, which Max darkly jokes is technically 3 broken motorcycles held together with wire and sheer willpower, and they arrive at Villa Maria.
The Villa Maria acts as a psychological oasis. The author details the pristine architecture of the place, the perfect symmetrical facade, the polished brass nameplate, and specifically a small glazed terracotta randall above the entrance showing a disconsolate Virgin Mary clutching her child.
Inside, it is cavernous and cool, decorated with Persian rugs and impressionistic paintings. It is a desperate, concerted attempt to maintain a small pocket of civilization while the world literally burns to ash outside the front door.
And Rosamund, the host, orchestrates this oasis with very strict rules of engagement.
Rosamund's 3 rules are a masterclass in compartmentalization. Rule 1, she personally greets every single guest at the door, maintaining a facade of normal social grace.
Rule 2, it is considered unforgivably rude to speculate about where she gets the copious quantities of spirits on offer, especially when you can barely find a single bottle of warm beer on the rest of the starving island.
And Rule 3, which is the most important one, absolutely no talking shop after the first hour. She even has a small handbell she rings to enforce this boundary.
She explains, all week I get nothing from Hugh but barrages and Beauforts and Junker 88s. For a few small hours, I'd like to talk about something else.
These social rituals might seem frivolous on the surface, but they are absolutely structural necessities for mental survival. Hugh, her husband, is lieutenant colonel in the Royal Artillery. He's a brilliant mathematician who personally calculated the incredibly complex box barrage of anti-aircraft fire over Grand Harbor.
But here, inside the villa, he plays the role of the genial host and amateur actor. He accosts Max at the drinks table with obscure Shakespeare trivia, quoting Mistress Quickly from Henry IV, Part 2.
Ah, thou honeysuckle villain.
Max dutifully fires the correct play back at him. It is a tedious, highly repetitive game, but its very repetition is deeply comforting to them. It proves to themselves that they are still cultured men, not just animals hiding in caves from explosions.
But inevitably, before the bell rings, they break the no-talking shop rule, because the reality pressing in on them is simply too heavy to ignore.
Hugh boasts about the artillery knocking down 101 enemy planes in the month of April, but Max internally synthesizes the horrific data behind that seemingly triumphant number.
Yes, the artillery did well, but only because the targets were so unimaginably numerous. The Luftwaffe flew an absolutely staggering 9,600 sorties against Malta in April alone.
Let that number sink in. 9,600 flights over an island the size of a city? That is over 300 bomber flights a day. The drone of the engines must have been a constant, inescapable physical vibration in their skulls.
And that reality brings up the terms Rosamund mentioned, Beauforts and Junker 88s. It is important to understand what those mean to fully grasp the terror.
The Junker 88 was a highly versatile, incredibly destructive German twin-engine bomber. It was the workhorse of the Luftwaffe, capable of dive bombing with terrifying precision.
Against that, the British had the Beauforts gun, which was an anti-aircraft autocannon. But as we will see, having the guns is useless if you don't have the ammunition to feed them.
The most tragic statistic Max reflects on involves the reinforcement flight. Just 10 days prior to this party, the U.S. Navy aircraft carrier USS Wasp had braved the Mediterranean to deliver 46 brand-new, spanking Spitfires to the island.
It seemed like absolute salvation. Finally, fighter cover to protect the island. But Field Marshal Kesselring isn't stupid. He watched them arrive, waited patiently for the planes to land, waited for them to be grounded, refueling, and highly vulnerable, and within 3 days, intense targeted carpet bombing destroyed or completely disabled almost all of them right on the runways.
The despair of seeing your salvation destroyed before your eyes must have been crushing. Kesselring is clearly going for the knockout punch.
Without fighter cover, The vital supply convoys cannot get through the blockade. If the convoys don't get through, the island starves. Invasion feels imminent.
And piled on top of this massive macro-level despair, Max is carrying a deeply personal, secret burden regarding the submarine fleet. Hugh tips Max off that all the submarines will be leaving Malta for good within a week, heavily influenced by the recent devastating loss of the sub-upholder.
Tell me about the upholder.
The loss of the upholder and its commander, a man nicknamed Wankers Wanklin, is a critical turning point in the psychological morale of the island. Wanklin wasn't just a capable submarine commander, he was an absolute island hero.
He was a modest, soft-spoken Scotsman with a biblical beard and a Victoria Cross.
He had sunk over 100,000 tons of enemy shipping. He possessed a quiet aura of invincibility that the entire garrison actively fed off of. When he went down, it proved that he was a mere mortal, which terrified everyone else. If he couldn't survive, who could?
And here we see the crushing, invisible weight of Max's job. Max knew about the upholder's demise before anyone else on the island.
He found a brief, cryptic mention of a nameless submarine destroyed off the coast of Tripoli in a translated Italian radio intercept transcript.
He did some discreet, anxious digging, confirmed internally that it was indeed the upholder, and then, well, he sat on the news for days.
Think about the implications of that. Think about the immense psychological burden of being the sole gatekeeper of a nation's grief.
Max wanted desperately to be wrong. He wanted to look out over the harbor and see the Maltese cheering the sub back into port.
But he knew it was gone. And he knew he needed a couple of days to figure out exactly how to soften the blow for the public, how to gild this incredibly bitter pill before releasing the information.
The emotional toll of constantly managing the truth is profound. Max realizes in this specific moment that he has completely stopped writing personal condolence letters to the families of friends who die in combat.
He used to write them religiously, now he doesn't. Because if he allowed himself to actually feel the authentic grief of every single loss, he would simply cease to function. He has to construct a wall of emotional numbness just to do his job.
Complicating Max's required emotional numbness is his undeniable, simmering romantic tension with Mitzi, who is the wife of one of the remaining submarine commanders.
Mitzi creeps up on him in the garden during the party. She is described as beautiful, with startling green eyes and blonde hair. They have this incredibly palpable, secret banter.
Max recalls their very first meeting, where he pompously shared his grand theory about the Maltese surviving the endless bombs by going deep into the underground catacombs, tapping into some ancient survival instinct. He called them troglodytes.
Mitzi's response to that grand theory was perfect, and it shows exactly why he is drawn to her. She had mocked his academic pretentiousness, saying, "Once a troglodyte, always a troglodyte," and then completely deflated his theory by pointing out she'd love it a lot more if she didn't spring from a long line of impoverished Irish potato pickers.
It shows she is his intellectual equal, completely able to pierce through his defensive armor.
But her presence at this party raises the stakes for Max astronomically. If Hugh is right, and the submarines are permanently leaving Malta to avoid destruction, then Mitzi's husband leaves. Which means Mitzi leaves.
Probably to Alexandria, 1,000 miles away. Max's macro-level job of managing the news of the war is suddenly crashing violently into his micro-level personal desires and his fear of losing her.
Seeking a distraction from Mitzi and the overwhelming weight of the news, Max heads up to the flat roof of the Villa Maria, an area known as the Crow's Nest.
This is where the younger crowd gathers away from the older officers. The author paints such a vivid picture of this specific subculture. You have these adolescent girls in home-stitched frocks, awkwardly proud of their new figures, hanging on to every single word spoken by the young, exhausted RAF pilots.
And the language being spoken up there is entirely unique. The pilots have constructed an elaborate tribal slang. What are some examples of this, and why do they do it?
It is a profound psychological defense mechanism masquerading as casual banter. They don't use regular words because regular words carry the heavy weight of regular reality.
Instead, an enemy bomber coming to kill them is just a big job. An enemy fighter plane is a little job. The freezing, terrifying cockpit of their aircraft is just their office.
They never crash or land desperately, they simply pancake. If they're complaining about the horrific food or the lack of parts, they take a dim view or a ropey view of it. If someone is exaggerating a story, they're shooting a line.
And their greatest, most mortal fear isn't dying, it's simply being bounced from up sun.
It's wild how they use this slang as a sort of verbal armor. If you don't use the real words for death and destruction, you don't have to face the real danger.
But creating this exclusive jargon, they build an impenetrable wall between themselves and the terrifying reality of what they do every day. It actively masks their fear and bonds them together as an exclusive tribe.
And up on this roof, amidst this tribal slang, Max's friends, Freddie, the strict British medical officer, and Elliot, a boisterous American liaison officer, rope him into a deep moral debate.
Elliot poses a hypothetical conundrum that I want to spend some real time analyzing because it gets to the heart of how war twists morality.
It is a brilliant philosophical exercise dropped right into the middle of a war zone. Elliot asks them to imagine this scenario. You are a wing commander taking a much-needed break at the rest camp. You've had a few drinks. You stumble into what you think is your assigned room, but it's the wrong room.
And in the bed, you find two male officers. One is a pilot in your own squadron, one isn't, but the one in your squadron is a first-class, highly reliable pilot who shoots down planes and saves lives.
Homosexuality, of course, was strictly illegal and a court-martial offense in the British military at this time. So Elliot asks the table, what do you do?
This breaks down into three very distinct philosophies of leadership and survival. Let's look at Freddie first. Freddie, the medical officer, is the strict moralist in this scenario.
He is visibly disgusted by the hypothetical. He insists on the absolute letter of the law and rigid morality. He says he would immediately report them to the air officer commanding without hesitation.
To Freddie, rules are rules, regardless of the war.
But I want to push back on Freddie's stance. In a vacuum, upholding the law makes sense. But when you are losing planes every day, and this pilot is saving the lives of the men around him, doesn't Freddie's rigid morality actually endanger the entire island? By removing a good pilot over a private act, isn't he actively helping Kesselring?
That is the exact friction the author wants us to feel. Freddie represents the old world, the pre-war establishment that believes civilization only survives if the rules are upheld entirely, without exception. To Freddie, if you compromise on military law, you invite chaos, and chaos loses wars.
But you're right to question the pure arithmetic of his choice. Then you have Elliot, the American pragmatist. Elliot is hilarious but utterly cynical in his response. He says it's not a question of morality or personal taste at all. He crudely notes he has absolutely no interest in the act himself.
But he says he would absolutely, definitely report them.
And his reasoning is purely selfish.
Completely selfish.
Okay.
He explains that if he doesn't report them, and word eventually leaks out, because secrets always leak out, that he walked in and actively covered it up, it will be his own head on the chopping block with the military brass.
He acts out of pure self-preservation within the unforgiving chain of command. He doesn't care about the men, and he doesn't care about the morality. He only cares about protecting his own career and his own neck.
Which brings us to Max, who takes the third path. Max represents the sentimentalist. He states flatly that he would not report them.
When he is pressed by the others on why he would risk his own career to cover up a crime, Max says, morale. A squadron's like a family. He argues forcefully that sending two good men home in total disgrace would completely shatter the fragile cohesion of the unit.
He values the functional, messy human family of the squadron over the strict, unbending military regulations.
I want to direct this right to you, the listener. Consider the implications of this dilemma deeply. Which approach would you actually take? In a life-or-death environment where unit cohesion literally means the difference between your pilots living or dying the very next day, what do you do?
Do you uphold the strict letter of the law like Freddie, believing that rules are the only thing separating you from the animals? Do you cover your own ass like Elliot, accepting that self-preservation is the only real law of war? Or do you prioritize the messy, complicated human reality of morale like Max?
This debate perfectly mirrors Max's broader job at the information office. He constantly, daily, chooses the family's morale over the absolute, unvarnished truth.
Wow.
He hides the ugliness to keep the family fighting.
Before they can settle the philosophical debate, the piercing, plaintive wail of the air raid siren violently breaks the air.
It is cocktail hour. As Elliot casually notes, you could almost set your wristwatch by the Germans and their Teutonic timekeeper.
But what happens next is a testament to the sheer, grinding exhaustion of the Maltese people. Instead of running in panic to the underground rock shelters, completely ignoring the troglodyte survival instinct Max talked about earlier, most of the crowd at the party simply stays exactly where they are on the roof.
They grab their drinks and wander over to the parapet to watch the sky.
The text notes explicitly that profound physical and mental exhaustion had blunted their fear, replacing it with a weary, heavy fatalism. They are simply too tired to be terrified anymore.
And from the high ground of Slima, they have a grandstand panoramic view of Marsenkset Harbor and Valletta. The visual spectacle of the destruction approaching them is overwhelming.
The first wave comes in, the Messerschmitt 109 fighters. They are flying with an uncharacteristically loose, arrogant formation. The author compares them to a boxer in his prime swaggering into the ring. They fly loosely because they know the British have barely any planes left to contest them. They own the sky, and they know it.
Following the fighters is the main event, a massive Great Staircase of Junker 88 bombers coming steadily out of the north. The targets are clearly the inland airfields, Takali, Lucca, Halfar.
And the response from the island's anti-aircraft defenses is pathetically weak. Remember that grim statistic Hugh mentioned earlier about the Bofors guns? Because of the absolute blockade, the guns are strictly rationed to just 15 rounds a day.
Think about that math. A Bofors gun fires at a rate that expends its daily quota of 15 rounds in a mere 7 seconds. 7 seconds of defense per day. So they're basically just throwing pebbles at a giant, tickling the underbellies of the bombers. The carpet bombing begins, sending massive, terrifying killers of smoke and pulverized rock reaching up for the sun.
Watching this massive spectacle of destruction triggers a profound, paralyzing, traumatic flashback for Max. Earlier in the year, he was caught out in the open during a raid right at the Takali airfield.
He spent 20 agonizing minutes lying totally flat in a shallow ditch. The text describes the deranging, sanity-shattering terror of that experience, the solid ground bucking underneath him like a living thing, the lethal, chaotic symphony of flying rock and jagged metal tearing through the air around him.
But what is truly fascinating is his specific fear. His greatest fear wasn't being blown to pieces by the explosives. It was choking to death on the specific, sickly, yellow-gray limestone dust that exploded outward, enveloping everything and completely blotting out the sun.
That detail is so specific, and it perfectly captures the physical reality of PTSD.
We have to understand how this trauma physically changes a person. The text explicitly states that Max suspects something essential within his physical brain was permanently changed that day in the ditch. He feels like a complex machine that was violently rewired.
He still functions, he still talks and works, but not quite as he did before the raid. This deep, unhealed trauma explains his current impenetrable stoicism. His emotional numbness isn't just professional detachment required for his job. It is a profound, untreated psychological injury.
It makes his ability to continue doing his job both a monumental triumph of willpower and a deeply sad personal tragedy.
And just as Max is grappling silently with this internal trauma on the roof, the climax of the scene unfolds right across the street from the villa. We're introduced to a character named Vitorin Zamet. Zamet is a grieving 60-something former lace merchant.
He is standing alone on his own roof, dressed completely inappropriately for a war zone in a formal black suit, wearing a simple home guard armband.
Zamet hates the enemy with a burning, all-consuming passion because the constant stress and terror of the war actively exacerbated his wife's fatal diabetes. He firmly blames the Axis for her death.
Usually during raids, he fires a completely useless pistol at the passing planes in a gesture of pure, impotent defiance. But today, he is holding a World War I-era bolt-action Lee-Enfield rifle.
The main German bombers finish their devastating runs and turn back north, and the Italian fighters descend to pick over the targets of opportunity left behind.
2 blue Italian Machi 202s, which were beautiful, deadly fighters famous for their showman-like aerobatics, strafe the submarine base on Manuel Island. To show off their dominance, they roll away and fly incredibly, dangerously low, skimming right over the steppe rooftops of Slima, roaring straight toward the Villa Maria.
The noise of their engines is utterly deafening.
But not so deafening that the crowd on the roof can't hear the sharp, distinct crack of Zamet's old rifle. He fires once, he works the bolt, he fires twice, a third time. Astonishingly, incredibly, Zamet hits the lead plane.
He actually hits the engine cowling of the fighter. Pieces of metal fall away from the aircraft. The engine immediately starts coughing, sputtering, and spitting thick black smoke.
The state-of-the-art fascist fighter plane starts rapidly losing height, completely crippled by an old, grieving man with a relic of a rifle.
It is an utterly impossible shot, a one-in-a-million miracle of physics and luck. The crowd on the roof is stunned into silence. Elliot, the American pragmatist, simply says, well, holy shit. Freddie, the moralist, asks, is it possible? And Max, the cynical sentimentalist, says, oh yes.
The ground crews on the island had been issued these old rifles purely as a psychological tool to boost their morale, giving them the illusion of fighting back, with absolutely no realistic expectation they'd ever hit anything moving at that speed. But Zamet actually did it.
So we have to look at what this moment actually means for our protagonist. Max watches the crippled plane go down over the horizon. He doesn't cheer. He doesn't celebrate.
He immediately grabs young Pemberton tightly by the arm and starts physically pulling him away from the party towards the stairs.
Pemberton asks, "Where are we going?" And Max replies, with total cold clarity, "To work."
This moment is the absolute synthesis of Max's entire existence on the island. While everyone else on that roof sees a divine miracle, a moment of triumph to celebrate, Max instantly sees the propaganda value. He sees the raw material for the narrative.
Think about the story. A grieving 60-year-old widower standing alone in a formal black suit on his own roof, using a bolt-action rifle from the previous war to take down a state-of-the-art fascist fighter plane.
It is the ultimate, perfect, unassailable story. It is the exact, perfectly gilded pill that this starving, besieged, terrified island desperately needs to read in tomorrow morning's daily situation report.
It's infinitely better than the myth of faith, hope, and charity, because it's completely real and it involves a civilian. It gives the precious illusion of agency back to a helpless population.
Max's deep trauma, his hard-won cynicism, his deep understanding of how the Strickland press operates, it all converges perfectly in this one moment of narrative exploitation. He is going to work to spin this localized miracle into psychological armor for the entire Isler's morale.
Let's take a deep breath and recap this incredible journey we've just been on, because we have covered massive ground. We started with the tense, deeply unresolved mysteries of a 1951 London restaurant where two men debate the very nature of memory and who was the hunter and who was the prey.
We plunged into the dark, putrid corners of a 1942 Maltese cemetery, witnessing the brutal, controlling mechanics of a serial killer operating under the absolute cover of falling bombs.
We navigated the complex, deeply cynical halls of the information office, exploring the moral gray areas of propaganda, the friction of unit cohesion, and the daily necessity of gilding the pill.
And we ended on a rooftop, watching an impossible rifle shot bring a momentary flash of defiant hope to a starving island, a moment instantly commodified by our protagonist to keep the war effort alive.
It truly is a masterclass in narrative tension, perfectly balancing the macro history of a besieged island fortress with the micro history of human psychology fracturing under extreme stress.
Building on the source material we've explored so deeply today, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over. Consider this. Max's entire job, his sole purpose for existing on Malta, is to curate facts. He is an absolute expert at shaping narratives, at spotting the tiny discrepancies between what the RAF claims and what the artillery claims, and constructing a seamless, perfectly acceptable version of reality for the public to consume. He spends his life looking for the gaps in the story.
He's a professional skeptic.
Exactly that. But out there, in the dark, there is a killer. A killer who actively admires his own hands, who operates in the absolute shadows of the falling bombs, hiding his intimate crimes within the massive, overwhelming chaos of the war. He relies entirely on the fact that no one is paying attention to one dead girl in a cemetery when hundreds are dying in the rubble of the cities.
So the provocative question is this. In a world where the flow of truth is so tightly controlled by the military, where absolute chaos is the accepted norm, is a war zone the absolute worst place to try and catch a serial killer?
Or does the information officer's highly specialized, deeply cynical ability to spot the gaps in the official story, to see through the spin, make him the only person on the entire island who is actually equipped to see the dark truth hidden in the rubble?
Wow, that is an incredibly chilling thought to leave on. If anyone can spot a fabricated narrative meant to hide the truth, it has to be the man who fabricates them for a living. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. As always, we encourage you to keep questioning the narratives you consume daily. Look closely for the gaps in the stories you're told, and remember that sometimes the most profound and dangerous truths are hidden right behind the gilded pill. Stay curious, and we'll see you next time.